Here we go, recording in three, two, and one. All right, we started all the way back in episode 10. We went through episode 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175, 200, 225, and now episode 250, wife swap number 11.
Yeah. 11. We've done 11 wife swaps. Wow.
Welcome to episode 250 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 250.
I'm Jeffrey with your Nerdery
And I'm Zig with your murdery.
for yet another wife swap. I love doing these. I've been so excited for this one. This is going to be a lot of fun for me on this one, and I hope it is for you. I think I put together a very good episode for this, and so I've been very excited. I told Zig that if we didn't get to record this one today, I might go crazy because I've had this one in my back pocket for a while now.
Yeah, we shuffled around the recording of an episode just so we could do this one.
Yeah. On a very serious note, before I get into this, something I read earlier this morning. Did you know that there was a man arrested because he put on TikTok that he was developing a bomb, and his home got raided, and he indeed was doing a bomb, and his target was
Hmm?
Fort Worth.
What?
His target was Fort Worth, Texas.
Huh.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Wild and scary, to be honest. Um, just oh God, the violence level that's going on is just beyond. Um, anyway, I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm not going to belabor it. I'm not going to sit here and take my time. Welcome to another wife swap, episode 250. We are in episode or in year five of doing this podcast.
Yes.
Five long years of bringing you all this content, doing all this research, nerding out, murdering out. Wait, is that right? Yeah. Okay, we'll take that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Sure, why not?
going dark. You know, it's we bring the highs and lows, the ups and downs, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd for sure. But this week I take over. I'm going to jump right into the nerdery side of the house. For today, I got my information off several Wikipedia sites. Ultimate Classic Rock, BBC, Rolling Stone, Louder Sound, Classic Rock Review. And I have to say, this is where one of the things I love about our show is this is where you can not only nerd out, but then you get stories with a twist. I am doing something I've never done before in these wife swaps. On our last wife swap, which was episode 225, I covered Peter Gabriel and his wild theatrical years with Genesis. Today, I'm flipping the script and I'm going to dive into post Gabriel Genesis. So we will be talking about the band Genesis, and after Peter Gabriel, this is the band that remained, reinvented, and soared into the stadium area. For Genesis, I I like Peter Gabriel Genesis, I really do, but I love the solo Peter Gabriel. I like Phil Collins solo music, but I love Genesis. I think Genesis became even better once Peter Gabriel left, and that's saying a lot because they were great with Peter Gabriel. Um, with Peter Gabriel there, you had the costumes and the long suites, and that was the early prog rock. But this is really a story of what happens when the original front man leaves. We've seen this from time to time with groups, and some have been huge successes, some have not. In Excess changed out their front man due to tragedy, and they got mild success. Van Halen went to Van Hagar. They had big success with that. But some bands don't survive it. Some bands do not survive changing out their front man. And the question is, when you do that, can it morph? And in this, here's a spoiler warning. Yes, but the story from here gets weird, a little wilder, and a lot more radio friendly. In this episode, we're going to cover the transition, four landmark albums. We're going to be covering A Trick of the Tail, Duke, Invisible Touch, and the way we can't dance. Also, my personal experience at the 1992 Irving, Texas show. I was there, and then a reflection on the legacy. I'm not going to stop down and ask Zig what he thinks of the individual songs. I might stop down at the end of the album because these albums need to be talked about as a whole. Um, there's there's a definitive story here. The reason I picked these four albums is they tell a very definitive story of the post Peter Gabriel Genesis. They tell a very definitive story of what happened with the band. So we're going to harken back to August 15th, 1975. That's the date that Peter Gabriel officially left and announced his departure from Genesis. This was a band that had grown up doing very long suites, theatrical costuming, fantasy narratives, and now they stood at a fork. Keyboardist Tony Banks and bassist guitarist Mike Rutherford faced the question: do they keep Genesis going or just let it end? Meanwhile, drummer Phil Collins stepped up as the lead vocalist, and initially it was just to audition, but the result convinced the band. There were actually 400 people that auditioned prior to Phil Collins reluctantly agreeing to the audition, reluctantly.
Well, yeah, Phil had been singing backup the whole time because he's got a great voice.
Yeah,
And at one point, Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks look at each other and go, why don't we just use Phil?
right. Well, and again, that's after 400 people. But the biggest thing is momentum was on the line, not just creatively, but financially. The next move that they did would determine whether Genesis would just fade into prog rock lore or evolve into something big. And evolve they did. Their first studio album after Peter Gabriel's departure, A Trick of the Tail, was released February 13th, 1976. Again, this is where Phil Collins sang lead for the first time on songs like A Trick of the Tail and Squonk. The sound still leaned very prog rock. There were longest tracks, layered keyboards, guitar solos, expansive composition, but it really still sent a message. It sent the message of we're still here and we're still Genesis. When Peter Gabriel left after The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway in '74, Genesis had a choice. They could either stop or evolve, and they decided to evolve. And Trick of the Tail was proof of that life. Um, when Peter Gabriel left Genesis in 1975, it should have been the end. And a lot of people thought it was the end. It's funny because a lot of people thought Peter Gabriel's career would end after leaving Genesis. And the same critics were saying Genesis would end without Peter Gabriel because this was a band that was known for the front man with fox heads, flower costumes, and 12-minute epics about the apocalypse. But instead of collapsing, Genesis went back into the studio and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, "Let's just write." The result was a Trick of the Tail, and it's one of the great resurrection albums in rock history. The first without Peter Gabriel, the first with Phil Collins on lead vocals, and here was the shock of it. It's brilliant. It kept the progressive rock DNA, complex time signatures, long instrumental passages, mythic lyrics, but the production here is cleaner and the arrangements more melodic. They recorded this at Trident Studios, London, the same studio that Bowie's Ziggy Stardust was done in, and it was produced by David Henschel, who worked with Elton John. And the album really has a polished mid '70s tone. It was deep synths, analog reverb, and lush layering. Hensel's production emphasizes Phil Collins' drumming and Tony Banks' keyboards equally. So Genesis now sounded balanced rather than frontman led. I think you have a point.
Yeah, you can tell by this album that one of the major contributing songwriters is steeped in jazz time,
Yes.
which Phil Collins
Oh
is
yeah.
because Phil Collins was originally a jazz musician,
Yes.
and you can tell.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. But this was still Genesis, but just without the theatrical veil, and you can hear their personalities now. Ripples and Trick on the album point towards Duke and Invisible Touch, which would come years down the road. And this was where Phil Collins transitioned to his dual role of singer and drummer, which at the time was almost unheard of. Tony Banks was the secret architect of the album. Many of the tracks are his writing or co-writing. Critics were mostly pleasantly surprised at this album. They noted that the band sound revitalized. a trick of the tail was not just Genesis surviving, it was Genesis redefining what progressive rock could sound like with a heart, melody, and restraint. So we'll kind of dive into the album because right out of the gate, the opening track, Dance on a Volcano, it feels like Genesis was flexing its muscles here. It was a statement piece. There's complex time signatures, thunderous drums, and swirling keyboards. And the first time I heard this, I thought, wait a second, this sounds a lot like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And it did. It had that same aggressive energy, the same symphonic fire. Tony Banks was channeling his inner Keith Emerson while Phil Collins is pounding away at 7/8 time, which is that jazz time, like he's trying to knock a hole through the studio wall. And it was a warning shot saying,
He may
yes,
have.
yeah, he may have. But this was a warning shot. This was them saying, yes, Peter Gabriel's gone, but we can still melt your faith. Um, the, Genesis then did what only they can do. They pivoted. Track two, Entangled, really kind of drifts in like a dream. There's 12-string guitars, a gentle mellotron choirs, and this ghostly calm that erupts after the eruption of the opener. Steve Hackett, who was still with the band at the time, he co-writes it, and you can really feel his fingerprints all over it. It's very pastoral, it's very haunting, and it's really like lying in an English meadow at sunset while something unsettling just stirs out of view. The last minute of the song, which is all mellotron and atmosphere, might be one of the most beautiful things Genesis has ever recorded. Track three, which is Squonk, is the thunder to Entangled's rain. This is heavy blues bass built on folklore about an ugly little creature that cries itself into a puddle when captured. Phil's drumming is enormous, and his vocal delivery on this one, confident. That's the best thing you can say about it. This is the moment when you realize he's not trying to be Peter Gabriel. He's just trying to be Phil Collins. And you can practically hear the seeds of his solo career sprouting from this one. There was a big groove, big voice, big swagger
From Squonk.
from Squonk.
I would agree
Absolutely.
with that. Yeah.
And you also hear on this one the very beginning of the very trademark Genesis sound. Madman Moon follows, and this is Tony Banks' grand statement. This is lush piano lines, strings, and a cinematic feel that borders on classical composition. It's melancholy, it's beautiful, and this is Genesis channeling. Best way I could put it is kind of channeling Debussy with guitars. Phil Collins shows a completely different side here. He's very tender and vulnerable, and he's proving he can handle the emotional weight as easily as the power song. Then we go to Robbery, Assault, and Battery. This is a cheeky little crime story where Phil Collins sings in a Cockney accent about a hapless crook and the detective chasing him. And this is really vintage Genesis humor, and it's the song you could imagine Peter Gabriel doing in costume, but Phil Collins delivered it kind of with a wink. Musically, it's tight, it's complex, but it never feels self-indulgent. This is the band saying, hey, we can still have fun too. There is a lot more Emerson, Lake, and Palmer influence on this one as well. Ripples might be my personal favorite on this album. Mike Rutherford wrote the lyrics, and they're absolutely stunning. This is a meditation on aging, beauty, and change. You've got the words "sail away, away, ripples never come back." Excuse me. That chorus hits me every time. The midsection moves into an intricate 7/8 passage that really kind of like water flowing around rocks. And then Phil Collins' voice carries both ache and grace, and you realize you're hearing Genesis finding the emotional depth behind the theatrics. The title track, a Trick of the Tail, lightens the mood again. This is a whimsical story about a strange creature leaving its golden city to explore the human world. It's very catchy, bright. This one is almost Beatles-like, and you can sense the pop instinct coming out that would later define the band of the '80s. And this was Genesis discovering melody in a whole new way, less mystery and more heart. And then the closure, probably my second favorite one on this album, Los Endos. This is pure instrumental firepower. It pulls themes from earlier in the record, particularly Dance on a Volcano and Squonk. and ties the whole thing together in a 7 minute burst of energy. In concert, this became their show ending monster, especially when Phil Collins and Chester Thompson started trading drum fills back and forth. It's really one of those tracks that proves Genesis was a band of musicians and not just a vehicle for a singer. This album showed that Genesis could survive the loss of Peter Gabriel and keep their identity. At the same time, you're sensing that the seeds of change, more focus on songs, less on costume drama. And again, for A Trick of the Tail, Collins very reluctantly went into singing lead when replacement auditions failed. So by the time you reach the end of A Trick of the Tail, you realize Genesis didn't just survive losing Peter Gabriel, they transformed. It's a more balanced sound. The focus shifts from melody and musicianship, and it's still prog, absolutely, but there's a warmth to it. It's a charm that the earlier albums didn't always have. This is the album that made people stop saying, "Can they go on?" and start saying they actually might be better than ever. I like to think of it as Genesis saying we can do serious prog without the costumes. And if you want a single record that defines the rebirth of Genesis, A Trick of the Tail is it. What did you think about A Trick of the Tail?
Um, Squawk's my favorite tune on this album.
Great song.
But yeah, between that and the Robbers Assault and Battery, that's pretty good. I like the
Hmm.
whole the Cockney the thing that Collins does, which Gabriel couldn't do.
Yeah.
He's a little too upper middle class for
Yes.
that. Um, to me, this still sounds like Peter Gabriel Genesis.
It did. There's a
This
lot
one.
of it that does.
Yeah, this one. They get far away from that as they go forward. This is the
Oh,
closest
absolutely.
to the previous that they did. Having said that, this album is amazing.
Yeah. This is a transition album. And there is a lot of Peter Gabriel influence still here, and you'll hear it as you listen to the album.
Peter
And I
Gabriel has said in many interviews that he gets complimented for this album all the time. And he has to go, I thank you very much. But that was actually after I left.
yeah.
That goes to Tony and Phil.
Um yeah, it's a transition piece, and that's why there's still some Peter Gabriel in this. But then we're going to fast forward to 1980.
Okay, I
And
have a question.
yeah,
We you went past Wind and Weathering,
hmm,
and then there were three when they
correct,
got rid of Steve Hackney. Steve
correct,
Hackney?
Hackett.
Hackett. Steve Hackett.
Hmm.
Sorry.
Yep.
Why that choice?
So as I said at the very beginning, these four albums are what defined the Genesis journey.
And not that I disagree with you.
Yes,
I prefer, yeah, I think you are correct in
yes.
this instance. Yeah.
I didn't skip over those albums because I didn't think they're important, and not because I didn't think they're good, because there's good music on those as well. But these four albums give you a roadmap, a definitive journey of where Genesis went from no longer having Peter Gabriel to where we're going to end up here at the end. So that's why I picked those four
Yeah.
albums specifically, and that's why we're going to fast forward to 1980. There were albums in between this, but we're going to jump over to Duke, because Duke is where it's a turning point for Genesis.
My
The
favorite
band,
Genesis song is on this album too.
a lot of people's are on Duke, but the band is now a trio. It's Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins, because guitarist Steve Hackett, as we just said, left in 1977. So by 1980, Genesis had survived Peter Gabriel leaving, and even Steve Hackett, moving on. What remained were the three core members. There was Tony Banks on keyboards, Mike Rutherford on bass and guitar, and Phil Collins on drums, and now permanent lead vocal. Three men, three directions, and one question: what now? That's how Duke came about. It was released in March of 1980, and this is a turning point. This was Genesis stepping out of the purely progressive world and into something that felt new. So let's kind of set the scene. Late 1970s, Genesis had been experimenting, and then there were three in 1978, hinted at shorter radio friendly songs, but they hadn't nailed the formula yet. Meanwhile, Phil Collins' personal life was crumbling. His marriage was failing apart, and he poured that emotional weight into songwriting. You can feel it on Duke, and that's why I came to Duke as the next one. because
Okay.
here's where you can feel it, and this is where there's a serious turning point. Because if a trick of the tail was the rebirth, Duke is Genesis growing up, becoming both cinematic and human. This album really pushed further into songcraft. Turn It On Again is the hooky album that starts to bring stadium geography into the process. Sound wise, it's a mixture of prog rock roots. There's still sweet like structure and pop rock ambition. You can hear them testing the waters of mainstream. This is the bridge between the post Peter Gabriel survival phase and the commercial giant phase. Genesis began to change their audience scope. The album opens with Behind the Lines. It's a grand orchestral, it's sweeping keyboard overture that honestly, it could have gone on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But the groove underneath is tighter and it's funkier. And then Phil's voice. He is no longer on this album the drummer who just happens to sing. He is a full-blown frontman. He is confident, he is urgent, and he is soulful. It then goes into Duchess, which is one of their most underrated gems. This is the story of a performer's rise and fall, fame, glory, and isolation. And it's a clear metaphor for the band's own evolution. And you can really almost picture the crowd cheering as she fades into shadow. It's poignant, it's cinematic, and that electronic drum pattern gives it almost futuristic pulse. Then you get to the single, and let me rephrase that. Then you get to the single, Turn It On Again. This was Genesis rewriting the rules. 7/4 time signature, but somehow it grooves like a pop anthem. There's magic. They kept prog rock complexity, but they made it feel effortless. And every band has one song that defines their live shows. For Genesis, this was it. The crowd chant, the energy, Phil Collins bouncing around the stage. It was the transformation from art rock to arena rock, and it was now complete. If you are at any Genesis show in the 80s or 90s, you know the moment that the riff hits, the place explodes. Duke, however, isn't just the hits. Keith Hayes is pure Tony Banks melancholy. These are lush chords, ambiguous lyrics that really feel like they're standing in a fog of self-reflection. Man of Our Times gave Mike Rutherford's guitar some bite. This is the heavier side of the record. And really, this one foreshadows what Invisible Touch would later polish. Next, you have Misunderstanding, and this is Bill Collins' first big crossover song. This is a very simple, soulful, and heartbreakingly direct.
This is my favorite Genesis song.
Well, you can almost feel that this was the divorce papers in every
Yeah.
line he sings.
Must have been.
When
And
Misunderstanding,
there's some doo-wop vocals in it,
yeah,
which it's just like, what?
Misunderstanding is a great song. And when it hit US radio, it blew up. And suddenly Genesis was no longer just a progressive act from Britain. They were now charting next to the Police and the Cars. And emotional honesty, that pop sensibility, this is what would define Phil Collins' solo work and drag Genesis right along with him. The end of this album brings it all home. There's the final suite, which is Duke's Travels and Duke's End, and this ties everything together. Instrumentally, it's breathtaking. It revisits earlier musical themes and it turns the record into a concept piece without ever calling itself one. This is Genesis's last true prog epic, but streamlined, and every note has a purpose. Phil Collins' drumming in the closing minutes is pure clinic. You hear his jazz roots, his precision, and his emotional attack. When it fades out, you realize Duke didn't just abandon the old Genesis, it refined it. It took the theatrical ambition of the Gabriel years and wrapped it in modern sound. Critics called it a comeback, fans called it a rebirth. I call it the bridge. Duke is where Genesis stopped asking, "Who are we without Peter?" and started answering, "We're Genesis and we can do anything." It set the stage for everything that came next, the arena tours, the pop hits, the MTV videos, all the way to Invisible Touch. You can hear the transition happening right here in this album, one song at a time. What did you think of Duke?
Again, it's got my favorite Genesis song on there. I do like the last suite, the stuff about Duke. I think that's really cool.
Yep.
And it doesn't sound self-indulgent. And a lot
No,
of prog rock to me sounds really self-indulgent.
it can.
It's not, it's not, it's not at all. Duke is a great album.
Yeah. Yep.
Duke is a phenomenal album. And again, my favorite Genesis song's on there. It's Misunderstanding. And not just because of the vocals. There's everything about that song is badass.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. So by 1986, Genesis was not just a band
Whoa,
anymore.
whoa.
Now,
Abacab and Genesis. Because we had two more
again,
albums. Yeah.
again, the four albums that define a path. I
Okay.
have there. The reason I didn't address any of those others is they were all parts within the path, but the four albums that I'm talking about are very definitive milestones within that path.
Okay.
That's why I stayed with these four albums. Um, so they weren't just a band anymore. They were now a brand. They had gone from art rock underdogs to now they were full blown pop rock royalty. Um, the lineup was solid, the trio, and every one of them was firing on all cylinders. Their last few albums built momentum, like I said, but Invisible Touch is where they reached escape velocity. It was released on June 6th, 1986, and this album was not just successful, it was everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Five
Cannot
top,
cannot undercut how big this fucking album was.
no,
It was in the charts for over a year.
five top five singles in the US alone. Genesis had now officially crossed over into global pop culture. This album is often cited as Genesis's commercial high watermark. They had hits like Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, and In Too Deep, which hit the airwaves and MTV. And the sound here is very polished pop rock. It's simpler song length, big choruses, and slick production. Genesis has gone from in this album for in the albums from Duke up to here, from prog oddballs to arena fixtures. The opening track is the title song, Invisible Touch, and it kicks off with an instantly recognizable synth riff. It's punchy, it's clean, and it is pure 80s. Phil Collins sells it with that sly grin in his voice. It's part love song and part warning. It's catchy, it's confident, and it has the perfect mission statement. Genesis had learned how to write hits without losing their edge.
He's
You,
he phrases invisible touch with three syllables in it.
Mhm.
And if anybody else had done that, it would have sounded dumb. Not the way he does it.
Right. You've got Tony Banks keyboard textures that built sonic architecture. You've got Mike Rutherford's locking in on bass, and Phil Collins, the drummer's drummer, giving it groove and precision. This was their first U.S. number one hit, and it deserved it. The second track, Tonight, 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 slows things down, but it keeps the tension. And originally, I don't know if you knew this, it was a moody 9 minute epic, and it got trimmed for radio. The full version, though, if you can find it, listen to it. It is classic Genesis atmosphere. It's dark, it's hypnotic, and it's cinematic.
8 minutes, 54 seconds. That is what we have in the YouTube playlist.
Fantastic. The lyrics themselves are about addiction and self-destruction, and it makes it one of their grittier songs. And it really was kind of proof that in their pop era they still had teeth. The brooding synth line feels like neon light cutting through smoke. Next is the fan favorite, Land of Confusion. And it's an opening guitar riff that really hits you like a jolt, and the drums are pure thunder. This is Genesis with a political bite. The Cold War was in full swing, and Reagan was on TV. Nuclear tension was everywhere, and the music video. The puppets from Spitting Image, characters of world leaders and celebrities. It was weird, it was grotesque, and it was hilarious, and it got played constantly on MTV. That video made Genesis cool to an entirely new audience. You've got that part in the video. Phil Collins is madly swinging his arms like a madman while Clay Ronald Reagan hits the red button. I mean, that's 80s perfection right there. Next is In Too Deep. And if Invisible Touch was their stadium anthem, In Too Deep was really their heart. This song is smooth, soulful, and almost Motown inspired. Phil Collins sings it straight from the gut. There's no irony, no distance, just emotion. And it became a huge hit on adult contemporary radio and even landed in the film Mona Lisa. This is the part where hardcore prog fans groan. Genesis went soft. But let's be honest, it's a beautiful track, and it proved Phil's emotional honesty could carry the band as powerfully as their technical chops. The record then takes a left turn with Anything She Does, which is a frantic synth pop track about obsession and fantasy. It's short, it's fast, and it shows how tight the band had become. Three musicians who could sound like six. Then we go to the big emotional core, Domino. Now, this is Genesis reminding everyone they still had progressive blood. There's two connected parts. It's nearly 10 minutes long, and it moves from intimate whispers to explosive crescendos. It's dramatic, it's strange, it's theatrical. This is the old Genesis hiding in the new sound. They used Domino as the live centerpiece for years, complete with flashing lights, pounding drums, and Phil Collins leading the crowd in a chant. It's the moment in the album when you realize they didn't just lose their prog roots, they just dressed them in better clothes. Throwing it all away takes it back down. It's bittersweet, it's melodic, it's emotional. This is another breakup anthem that could have been on a Phil Collins solo record, but Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford made it much richer with their interplay. By this point, Genesis wasn't just sharing songwriting credit, they were sharing identity. And this is the perfect late album breather before the knockout punch, because that punch is the Brazilian, purely
Brazilian.
purely instrumental closer. It's full of eerie percussion loops and synth textures. This is the band saying, don't forget, we can still weird out on you when we want to. It's a callback to Los Endos, but in 80s language, sequencers, drum machines, and studio wizardry. I always thought it closed out the record like a sci-fi movie fading to credits. I love the Brazilian.
Yeah.
Invisible Touch is Genesis at their honestly at their most competent. They had mastered the balance between craft and commerce. Each song was meticulously produced, but it's never sterile. This was not a band chasing hits. It was a band that was writing exactly what they wanted, and the world just happened to love it. Critics were divided. Some missed the complexity of Trick and Duke, but most agreed Genesis had done the impossible. They made progressive pop that worked on every level. For the live shows, this album changed everything. Genesis went full stadium rock, lights, lasers, gigantic drum risers, Phil Collins leading the crowds like a preacher, and it was only going to get bigger, all the way to We Can't Dance and the legendary the Way We Walk tour. By the time We Can't Dance dropped in 1991, Genesis was now the elder statements of rock. By 91, they were legends. We are now 15 years after Peter Gabriel's departure, and they had done what almost no other band ever could. They evolved, they thrived, and they dominated across two musical generations. We Can't Dance was their 14th studio album and their last with Phil Collins before the long goodbye. It blends big anthem style with more reflective songs like No Son of Mine, which is a very serious song. I Can't Dance, which is a fun song. Jesus, He Knows Me. Phil Collins was now a solo megastar. Tony Banks remained the band's architect. He was still crafting those cathedral style synth textures. Mike Rutherford had found success with Mike and the Mechanics. But when they came together for We Can't Dance, it wasn't nostalgia. It was confidence in them owning their maturity. This album feels like a full circle moment. This is part reflection, part reinvention. It was released in 1991. It's packed with hits, but it also breathed. It was a double platinum powerhouse, but it also felt like a reflection. This was a mature Genesis that was still inventive, but wiser and more self aware. The songs are longer, they're more deliberate, and there's real emotional gravity in the writing. And it was the sound of a band closing a chapter, even if they weren't saying it aloud at that time. The opener, No Son of Mine, set the tone. It's got a delayed guitar riff, which is eerie, echoing, and almost mechanical and pulls you in. And then Phil Collins' voice hits. He's very weary, honest, and carrying all the weight of age and experience. This is not a song about fantasy or mythology. It's about people, families, and regret. Genesis had gone from the surreal to the human, and it worked. This is a powerful song. Listen to the words carefully when you listen to this song. It is powerful.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Honestly, this is where we differ in opinion. I don't think this album is very good except for that song. That song is amazing.
And we will disagree on this because there's a lot of power on this. Right after that, you settle into melancholy because they flipped the switch with Jesus, He Knows Me. This is a satire on televangelism and religious hypocrisy, and it's wrapped in one of the most infectious grooves they ever wrote. It's social commentary with a beat, and it's just as relevant today as it was in '91. Phil Collins delivered it with a smirk and a swagger. Honestly, it's almost like he was mocking his subject. The video for it was classic. It was Phil in preacher makeup, sunglasses, and a white suit. This was pure MTV gold. And that combination of humor and sharp commentary became a part of the late era Genesis DNA. They could make you laugh, they could make you think and dance, and sometimes all in the same verse. Speaking of dancing, next along I Can't comes I Can't Dance. And this one is kind of interesting. This started as a joke riff between Mike Rutherford, Mike Rutherford, but the band just kind of ran with it, tongue in cheek, very self aware, very magnetic. It had a bluesy stomp, sarcastic lyrics, and they had this awkward runway walk that they dance in the video. It's very sarcastic, it's funny, it's very self aware. And this was Genesis making fun of themselves and the fashion obsessed culture of the 90s. Phil Collins' delivery is perfect. He leans into the absurdity with his grin, and you can even hear it without seeing his face. The kicker on this one, it became a monster hit. Everyone knew I Can't Dance. It was everywhere. If you were alive in the early 90s, you saw it on MTV, you saw it in commercials, you probably heard it at your cousin's wedding. The next is Hold On My Heart. I love this song. It's a very slow burn. It's beautifully arranged, and I think it's Phil Collins at his most vulnerable. Tony Banks' keyboards are very soft and airy in here, and Mike Rutherford's guitar almost whispers through this. This is Genesis as seasoned craftsmen. There's no tricks, no flash, just emotional honesty. And it's really easy to forget how intimate this band could be when they slowed down. If you listen closely, you can this song listen to it very closely because I really feel this song was them almost feeling the curtain beginning to fall, that they knew the end of that the era was ending. The next song we go to that I have to mention is Driving the Last Spike. Love this song, start to finish. This song takes us back to the progressive storytelling route. It's 10 minutes long and there's no flashy hooks, there's no radio edit. It's just a slow build of emotion and history. It's the story of of British railway workers of the 19th century, the navies who dug tunnels, blasted rock, and built the railways that changed England forever. It's written from the perspective of one of those men, reflecting on the sacrifice, the danger, and how nobody remembers the ones who died building progress. The lyrics read like a ghost confession. It's one worker reflecting on sacrifice and obscurity. And in it, to me, Phil Collins inhabited the character. His voice starts soft and haunted and then really rises with desperation. By the time the keyboards and drums explode mid song, you're inside a cinematic moment. And this is Genesis doing what they'd always done best. They took ordinary people and they turned their stories into myth. Driving the Last Spike reminds everyone that Genesis could still write an epic, not about gods or beasts this time, but about humanity itself. Another deep track that deserves some love is Fading Lights, and this is the album's closer. It's a long, reflective piece that feels like a farewell letter to fans. It opens with a melancholy keyboard theme and lyrics about memories slipping away. It has this line in it. Another time, it might have been so different, and if only we could do it all again. The song builds slowly. Phil Collins' voice is almost whispering until the middle section breaks open and really one of the last great Genesis instrumentals. Tony Banks synths cascade like waves. Tony Rutherford bass anchors the storm, and Phil Collins pounds the drums with controlled fury. This is Tony Banks at his most introspective. When the instrumental section kicks in, it's pure vintage Genesis. The long synth solos, cascading drums, and really that feeling of finality. This is everything Genesis ever was: progressive, emotional, beautiful, all distilled into a perfect 10 minutes. No Son of Mine begins the album looking at broken family ties. Fading Light ends it by looking back at everything that's passed. It's really hard not to hear it as I listen to this album of the band saying goodbye, even if they didn't realize it yet. Never a Time is a gentle piano driven ballad that hit the U.S. top 30. It's often overlooked, but it's beautifully crafted. It's a very soft, bittersweet ballad that's really kind of nestled in the middle of the record. It's one of those songs that sneaks up on you. It's got gentle guitars and heartfelt lyrics and a melody that lingers on. It never became a stadium anthem, but it really kind of captures the quiet ache of relationships fading out, and not with a bang, but kind of with a sigh. Dreaming While You Sleep is a haunting mid-tempo track about guilt and hit and run remorse. And this is one of Phil Collins's best late era vocal performances. I love this song. The synth textures on here shimmer, and Phil Collins' voice just drips with remorse. There's the chorus, "Dreaming while you sleep, dreaming while you sleep," feels like a confession whispered into the dark. This was storytelling on a very personal scale, very intimate, very unsettling, and it's the sound of conscience wrapped in melody. They proved here that even at the height of their pop fame, Genesis hadn't forgotten who they were. They could still tell a story, build a world, and break your heart all in 10 minutes flat. When you take it together, We Can't Dance is a balance of contrast, humor and heartbreak, simplicity and sophistication. You've got the pop hits like I Can't Dance sharing space with the 10-minute epics like Driving the Last Bike. This is personal sorrow beside social commentary. This is Genesis older and wiser saying we can still do everything we used to. We're just choosing to do it differently now. Again, if you listen very closely to this album, you really feel like the curtain is lowering on Genesis. This would be the last studio album with Phil Collins before his long breakup from the band. It was the end of an era, and it was the closing of a circle. So you had said you really don't like this album. Overall, what do you think?
I think this album reeks of self-indulgence, with two exceptions, and because I forgot Driving the Last Spike's on here. Driving the Last Spike is incredible, and No Son of Mine also incredible. Any other band puts out an album with those two songs in it, it's worth having. I think the rest of this album it comes off as self-indulgent to me. I just didn't care for it.
See, and
Um,
I didn't see this. This to me was the defining moment. It was going to be hard to top Invisible Touch.
you can't top
Hard.
Invisible Touch. You can't. That was
No,
a great album.
and I don't think they did with 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 um with this album. I don't think they did, but I do think that they perfectly closed the circle on a journey. Again, why I chose these four albums, because I think these four albums are definitive milestone stops on what I think was a phenomenal journey. Now,
I would not disagree with you on I would not disagree with you on that it is a fantastic journey. I just
yes,
didn't care for the last album. Again, with the exception of two really, really good songs,
right,
standout tunes.
absolutely. But we got to talk about the tour. The We Can't Dance World Tour was, or the Way We Walk World Tour, excuse me, it was massive. There were over 70 shows across the globe, and it culminated in one of the best live recordings of the career, The Way We Walk Volumes 1 and 2. And there I was, Irving, Texas, Texas Stadium, 1992, right of the stage, less than 20 feet away.
Nice.
I'm going to tell you right now, Genesis was in the prime, and it was an experience. It was electric. This was not just a concert, this was a masterclass in performance. From the first hit of No Son of Mine, the stadium exploded. There were tens of thousands of fans singing every word, the lights painting the sky. The old Texas Stadium, I think, held like 50 or 60,000 people. There was not an open seat in that house. Um, they covered hits from Invisible Touch and We Can't Dance, plus earlier material. The production, the visuals, everything was dialed to the max. And then the moment, and you can get this whole concert on YouTube, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, the moment, the legendary drum duet between Phil Collins and Chester Thompson. This was a showcase moment where Phil Collins and Chester Thompson matched each other in a drumming face-off.
Were we wrong about Daryl Sturmer being the drummer? Was he the guitarist instead?
He may have been because it was Chester Thompson on the
Yeah.
drums.
Yeah, and that's who Collins used in his solo stuff too. It was the same guy.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Um, when they did this, the crowd erupted. It was undescribable, honestly. Two kits side by side, pounding and singing, trading fills, like two warriors going at it is what it was. They are monsters on this. It was it was thunder and the entire building shook. And from my vantage point, 20 feet from the stage, I could see the beads of sweat on their face. I could see the sticks flying. I could see the tightness of this band. And you felt like you were part of a moment. Genesis was not just performing, but manifesting their stadium era power in this. You didn't just hear it, you could feel it in your chest. There was vibration and precision, pure joy of performance. And even now, decades later, I can still feel it. I watch this video from time to time. This was not Genesis just playing songs. They were proving that three men could sound like an army. The set list was perfection. Land of Confusion, Invisible Touch, Domino, I Can't Dance. Even Los Endos was in here. They were not phoning it in on this concert. They were celebrating a lifetime of music, and the chemistry on the stage was unreal. Phil Collins commanded the crowd. Tony Banks lost in his keys. Mike Rutherford smiling as he bounced from bass to guitar. To me, this was like watching history because it was. We Can't Dance ended up being Phil Collins' final studio album with Genesis, at least till they did a reunion decades later. But you
Yeah, but
can
did
hear
they actually do an album, or was it
they
like
did
a
not. They did not.
okay?
No,
It's just a live
just re.
recording. Okay.
And you can really hear the closure in it. These were songs about faith, family, loss, growing older, and this was Genesis saying goodbye without saying goodbye. The critics called it mature, reflective, maybe even a little too long. I disagree, but fans all knew better. This was the sound of a band that had conquered everything and still had something to say. For me, standing there in Irving, Texas that night, it was not about pop or prog anymore. This was about connection. It was a shared history between the band and the audience that was carried on through sound waves and drum fills. So when I think about Genesis after Peter Gabriel, We Can't Dance is where the journey culminates. This wasn't Genesis closing a chapter, it was Genesis writing their epilogue. They had gone from theatrical art rock to mainstream giants without ever losing their soul. And to me, they went out with grace, humor, and heart. If A Trick of the Tail was rebirth, and Invisible Touch was a supernova, We Can't Dance was their legacy. It was a reflection. This was their final perfect mirror held up to a lifetime of music and a final bow from the band that had nothing left to prove.
Would you say it was the funeral for the band?
In a way, in a way.
Okay.
And a lot of this album sounds that way too. They just didn't know it at the time. They just didn't know it. When Peter Gabriel walked away from Genesis in 1975, most people assumed the story was over. Most people thought, how could a band built on masks, myth, and 20-minute epics survive without its storytellers? And as I said at the beginning, most bands would have died after such a loss, and Genesis didn't. What we've seen across a trick of the tail, Duke, Invisible Touch, and We Can't Dance, to me is something extraordinary. It's a band that refused to die and reinvented itself again and again without losing its heart. Tony Banks stayed the quiet architect, crafting those vast keyboard landscapes. Mike Rutherford became the backbone. He was steady, he was melodic, and he grounded all. And Phil Collins, the drummer who was not supposed to sing, became one of the most recognizable voices in rock history. Together, they didn't just continue Genesis, they redefined it. What I love about this evolution is that it mirrors our own lives. We all start out a little theatrical, trying to prove something, dressing up our ambitions in costumes and noise, but with time, experience, and maybe a few scars, we find clarity. That's why I did these four albums together. Genesis did that. They went from myth to melody, from art rock to honest rock, from prog to pop. The shift is real and deliberate. It was art versus commerce. Some fans mourn the early era, some celebrate the hits. You can acknowledge both. Through it all, they kept the spark, the willingness to experiment and to reach and to feel. You can trace it in the music, the technical veracity of Dance on a Volcano, the heartbreak and misunderstanding, the political bite of Land of Confusion, and the humanity of No Son of Mine. It was different languages, same soul. When I stood in Texas Stadium in 1992, just 20 feet from that stage, watching Phil and Chester hammer out on that drum, it hit me that night. This was more than nostalgia. This was endurance. This was a band that outlived trends, critics, and expectations, and they were still giving everything they had. Every beat, every note, every ounce of sweat under those stage lights said the same thing. We're still here and we still matter. So when when I look back on post Peter Gabriel Genesis, I don't see a lesser version. I see the same creative spirit wearing a different face. I think it's a story of transformation that took one of rock's strangest acts into one of its greatest. From the volcano to the dance floor, from myth to humanity, Genesis proved that evolution isn't about losing who you were. It's about finding who you've meant to be. And that is the real trick of the tail.
Very nice.
And that's my story on Genesis.
Well, thank you, sir. That's actually awesome.
That's why I
Um,
was so excited to do this episode.
they
I sat and I listened to all four of these albums back to back to back.
are in our YouTube playlist too, kids.
And that's phenomenal too. Listen to these songs. They are beautiful. They some are heartbreaking. They're poppy. Listen to all of it and listen as I talked about this progression from where they were all the way through. And I think you're going to find some of the greatest rock hits of the last what now 50 years.
Mhm.
You're going to find some phenomenal stuff. I have so much Genesis in playlist. I listen to Genesis stuff all the time. No Son of Mine is one of my all-time favorites because I think there's so much power and hurt in that song. I just
Yeah.
can't help but
Yeah.
listen to it
It
over and
sounds
over
like he
again.
blew out the microphone when he was recording that.
Oh
It
yeah.
really does. And again,
Yeah.
to me, that album sounded self-indulgent, except for two tracks, and those two tracks are fucking phenomenal.
They are. They absolutely are. And that's the one part where we'll disagree. I don't think it was self-indulgent on this album. I think they did a lot of tongue in cheek on here. I think they did a lot of just basically what they wanted to. But at the same time, could it have been some self-indulgence? Maybe. This was Genesis at the height of their power. Post Invisible Touch, where they could Post Invisible Touch, where Genesis could have wrote a song about their cat's asshole and it would have hit the chart.
Yes. I was about to say the same thing. They could have written a song about their cat's asshole and hit the charts.
So yeah, maybe there is some indulgence there, and I'm just a little um jaded to that album because it to me it could be the fact that I went to that concert and it was beautiful. It was wonderful. It was energetic. I got to be 20 feet from the stage. I damn near could have reached out and touched Phil Collins. I spent most of that concert on the sideline, on the seat where I was, 20 feet from that stage. And I swear, if they had done the live album from Texas Stadium, you would have heard me off the side of the stage going, "Thank you, thank you, thank
Thank
you."
you. Did they
So
do any Peter Gabriel era Genesis songs? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, they did the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway
Nice.
in there. Yes, they absolutely did. They do still take some harkening back to that. So anyway, thanks for letting me do this. Thanks for letting me
Sure.
do basically a part two of a wife swap. I knew once I did Peter Gabriel, I had to do Genesis on
No,
top
no,
of
it
that.
totally, yeah, totally fucking makes sense. And I agree with
Um,
you. I would say Abacab and Genesis are worth a listen to as well.
oh
Genesis
no,
from
no, no.
1983.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying those albums aren't worth a listen to. I think you should listen to their entire discography. All I'm saying is like I said, these
These
four
four,
albums were perfect milestones in their journey, where
yeah,
they started and where they ended.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Everything in between, you're going to find a lot of good stuff
Yeah,
still, a lot of good stuff. So listen to all of them, but listen to these four with that mindset of them starting, growing, and ending.
I still think Misunderstanding's their best song. It's my favorite.
Well, there you go. That's the end of mine. So
Well, thank you, sir.
I'll let you take it away
I
from
guess I
here.
will take over with the nerdery side of the house.
No
No, I will take over with the murdery side of the house.
murder.
Today, for episode 250, we're going to talk about the Armenian Genocide. I got my information from the Armenian National Institute, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the New York Times, and Wikipedia. The Armenian Genocide took place between the spring of 1915 and the fall of 1916. At least 664,000 and possibly as many as 1.2 million Armenians were killed. They died in both massacres and individual killings. They were also killed through systematic ill treatment, exposure, and starvation. The plight of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire triggered a response in the United States. The public philanthropic efforts were unprecedented. On the eve of World War I, there were 2 million Armenians in the declining Ottoman Empire. By 1922, there were fewer than 400,000. The others, some 1.5 million, were killed in what historians consider a genocide. As David Fromkin put it in his widely praised History of World War I and its aftermath, a peace to end all peace. Rape and beatings were commonplace. Those who were not killed at once were driven through mountains and deserts without food, drink, or shelter. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians eventually succumbed or were killed. The man who invented the word genocide, Raphael Lemkin, a lawyer of Polish Jewish origin, was moved to investigate the attempt to eliminate an entire people by accounts of the massacres of the Armenians. He did not, however, coin the word until 1943, applying it to Nazi Germany and the Jews in a book published a year later, Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. But to Turks, what happened in 1915 was at most just one more messy piece of a very messy war that spelled the end of a once powerful empire. They reject the conclusions of historians in the term genocide, saying there was no premeditation in the deaths, no systematic attempts to destroy a people. Indeed, in Turkey today, it remains a crime, insulting Turkishness, to even raise the issue of what happened to the Armenians. In the United States, a powerful Armenian community centered in Los Angeles has been pressing for years for Congress to condemn the Armenian genocide. Turkey, which cut military ties to France over similar action, has reacted with angry threats. A bill to that effect nearly passed in the fall of 2007, gaining a majority of co-sponsors and passing a committee vote. But the presidential administration of that time, noting that Turkey is a critical ally, more than 70% of the military air supply for Iraq go through the Incirlik Air Base. They're pressed for the bill to be withdrawn, and it was. The roots of the genocide lie in the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Let's talk a little bit of history here. Armenians have been in Anatolia since at least the 6th century BCE, which is about 1,500 years before the arrival of the Turkmen under the Seljuk dynasty. The Kingdom of Armenia adopted Christianity as its national religion in the 4th century of the Common Era, establishing the Armenian Apostolic Church. Following the end of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, 2 Islamic empires, the Ottoman Empire and the Iranian Safavid Empire, contested Western Armenia, which was permanently separated from Eastern Armenia held by the Safavids. By 1639, the Treaty of Zuhab, the Ottoman Empire was multi-ethnic and multi-religious, and its millet system offered non-Muslims a subordinate but protected place in society. Sharia law encoded Muslim superiority but guaranteed property rights and freedoms to worship 2 non-Muslims, dahimis, in exchange for a special tax, or the dahimis tax. The 1912 First Balkan War resulted in the loss of almost all of the empire's European territory. This is the Ottoman Empire. And the mass expulsion of Muslims from the Balkans. The Ottoman Muslim Society was incensed by the atrocities committed against Balkan Muslims, intensifying anti-Christian sentiment and leading to a desire for revenge. Now, this also has ties to the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, the same sort of thing going on. But this is not the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. This is the First Balkan War of 1912. The Balkan Wars put an end to the Ottomanist movement for pluralism and coexistence. Instead, the CUP turned to an increasingly radical Turkish nationalism to preserve the empire. CUP leaders such as Talant and Enver Pasha came to blame non-Muslim populations concentrations in strategic areas for many of the empire's problems, concluding by the mid 1914 as they were internal tumors to be excised. Of those, Ottoman Armenians were considered the most dangerous because CUP leaders feared that their homeland in Anatolia, claimed as the last refuge of the Turkish nation, would break away from the empire as the Balkans had. In January 1913, the CUP launched another coup, installed a one-party state, and strictly repressed all real or perceived internal enemies. After the coup, the CUP shifted the demography of border areas by resettling Balkan Muslim refugees while coercing Christians to emigrate. Immigrants were promised property that had belonged to Christians when part of the eastern Thrace was reoccupied by the Ottoman Empire during the Second Balkan War in mid 1913. So they had a Balkan War in 1912 and then another one in 1913. This is before the First World War. There was a campaign of looting and intimidating against Greeks and Armenians, forcing many to emigrate. Around 150,000 Greek Orthodox from the Aegean coast were forcibly deported in May and June of 1914 by Muslim bandits who were secretly backed by the CUP and sometimes joined by the regular army. This is what they call the CUP is the Young Turks movement. Um, the Ottoman Empire was collapsing. The people in charge knew this and they kind of took over. And even though technically it was still an empire, the emperor no longer had any power. He just set up in Topkapi Palace and these guys ran the show. You'll hear the word pasha a lot. That is an honorific in Turkish. Uh, Pasha is like lord or admiral or general, kind of all at the same time. Historian Matthias Jornlund states that the perceived success of the Greek deportations allowed CUP leaders to envision even more radical policies and yet another extension of a policy of social engineering through Turkification. A few days after the outbreak of World War I, the CUP concluded an alliance with Germany on August the 2nd, 1914. The same month, representatives went to an ARF conference demanding that in the event of war with Russia, the ARF incite Russian Armenians to intervene on the Ottoman side. So you've got Anatolia here, right? There's a little piece of it that kind of extends up into the Caucasus, which is where Armenia is. The Armenians controlled little bits of Anatolia, and we always think about Anatolia as being this big rough desert. It's not. The rest of the Middle East is fairly deserty. Anatolia is actually really nice. It's mostly grasslands. There's forests. There's mountains. You know, they've got a lot of sea coast. I mean, they're basically surrounded by water. Um, you get the Black Sea, the Caspian, and all that other stuff. It's a lot of stuff going on. So you've got this little section of Armenia where these people have basically moved down into Anatolia, which is the part we think of as the nation of Turkey, is just the Anatolian Peninsula. Well, it's just a big oval, basically. I mean, it's got coast, but it's roughly oval shaped. Well, the thing is, the Armenians, and there is some thought to the fact that they actually came from the um, people from Anatolia originally. So where they live is not actually their homeland. Their homeland is actually in Anatolia. Um, but they instead of being part of the Ottoman sphere of influence, they were the Russian sphere of influence and eventually the Soviet sphere of influence, and they were a Soviet state for most of the 20th century. Um, the delegates resolved that Armenians should fight for the countries of their citizenship. During its war preparations, the Ottoman government recruited thousands of prisoners to join the paramilitary special organization, which initially focused on stirring up revolts among Muslims behind Russian lines, beginning before the empire officially entered the war. On the 29th of October 1914, the Empire entered World War I on the side of the Central Powers by launching a surprise attack on Russian ports in the Black Sea, which they have a very large Black Sea coast. Many Russian Armenian were enthusiastic about the war, but Ottoman Armenians were more ambivalent, afraid that supporting Russia would bring retaliation. Organizations of Armenian volunteer units by Russian Armenians, later joined by some Ottoman Armenian deserters, further increased Ottoman suspicion against the Armenian population. Wartime requisitions were often corrupt and arbitrary and disproportionately target Greeks and Armenians. Armenian leaders urged young men to accept conscription into the army, but many soldiers of all ethnicities and religions deserted due to difficult conditions and concerns for their families. At least 10% of Ottoman Armenians were mobilized, leaving their communities bereft of fighting age men and therefore largely unable to organize armed resistance to deportation in 1915. Keep in mind, while this is going on, that part of the world is also still a battlefield. There were World War I battles fought while this was going on in the same area. During the Ottoman invasion of Russia and Persian territory, the special organization massacred local Armenians and Syriac Christians. In November of 1914, provincial governors of Van, Bitlis, and Erzurum sent many telegrams to the central governing process pressing for more severe measures against the Armenians. Now, at the time, Turkey owned the area of Van, right? Lake Van is the Armenian heartland. It is no longer in Turkey after the First World War. Both regionally and throughout the empire, these requests were endorsed by the central government already before 1915. Armenian civil servants were dismissed from their posts in late 1914 and early 1915. In February of 1915, the CUP leaders decided to disarm Armenians serving in the army and transfer them to labor battalions. The Armenian soldiers in labor battalions were systematically executed, although many skilled workers were spared until 1960. In April 1915, the Ottoman government embarked upon the systemic decimation of the civilian Armenian population. The persecutions continued with varying intensity until 1923, when the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist and was replaced by the Republic of Turkey. The Armenian populations of the Ottoman state was reported at about 2 million in 1915, and estimated 1 million had perished by 1918. While hundreds of thousands have become homeless and stateless refugees, by 1923, virtually the entire Armenian population of Anatolia, Turkey, had disappeared. The Ottoman Empire was ruled by the Turks, who had conquered lands extending across West Asia, North Africa, and Southeast Europe. The Ottoman government was centered in Istanbul or Constantinople and was headed by a sultan who was vested with absolute power. I said emperor. What I meant was sultan. The Turks practiced Islam and were a martial people. The Armenians, a Christian minority, lived as second-class citizens, subject to legal restrictions, which denied them normal safeguards. Not originally. I did have to go through some of these notes. Originally, they had protected status. Neither their lives nor their properties were guaranteed security. As non-Muslims, they were also obligated to pay discriminatory taxes. That is true. And denied participation in government. Scattered across the empire, the states of the Armenians was further complicated by the fact that the territory of historic Armenia was divided between the Ottoman and Russian empires. In its heyday in the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire was a powerful state. Its minority populations prospered with the growth of its economy, but by the 19th century, the empire was in serious decline. It had been reduced in size and by 1914 had lost virtually all its lands in Europe and Africa. The decline created enormous internal political and economic pressures, which contributed to the intensification of ethnic tensions. Armenian aspirations for representation and participation in government aroused suspicion among the Muslim Turks, who had never shared power in their country with any minority and who also saw nationalist movements in the Balkans result in the secession of former Ottoman territories. Never sharing power was actually inaccurate. But things were moving rather swiftly, and they were basically in a state of war from 1911-ish, late 1911, till like 1925. The First World War happened in that period. Demands by Armenian political organizations for administrative reform in the Armenian inhabited provinces and better police protection for predatory tribes among the Kurds only invited further repression. Now, the Kurds, who also figure into this story, they're not Iranian or Aryan population. But they're not technically Iranian or Persian, but they are like a subsect of the Iranian people. Not Persian, but still speaking an Iranian language, which is Indo-European. Um, the government was determined to avoid resolving the so-called Armenian question in any way that altered the traditional systems of administration. During the reign of the Sultan Abdul Hamid the second, series of massacres throughout the empire meant to frighten Armenians and so dampen their expectations, cost up to 300,000 lives by some estimates, and inflicted enormous material losses of a majority of Armenians. Now, Sultan Abdul Hamid II died in 1909, so this is actually well before all of this happened. In response to the crisis in the Ottoman Empire, a new political group called the Young Turks seized power by revolution in 1908. From the Young Turks, the Committee for Union of Progress, CUP, Ittihad va Tariq Jamiyet emerged as the head of the government in a coup staged in 1913. Jamiyeti changed his name to Kemal Ataturk. So we won't have to say that name again because I just butchered it. My Turkish is terrible. Um, the CUP espoused an ultra-nationalistic ideology which advocated the formation of an exclusively Turkish state. Now, World War I breaks out. They get on the side of the Central Powers. The Ottoman armies initially suffered a string of defeats, which they made up with a series of easy military victories in the Caucasus, because again, Turkey's right there, in 1918 before the Central Powers capitulated later that same year. Whether retreating or advancing, the Ottoman army used this occasion of war to wage a collateral campaign of massacres against the civilian Armenian populations in the region to which warfare was being conducted. These measures were part of the genocidal program secretly adopted by the CUP and implemented under the cover of war. They coincide with the CUP's large program to eradicate the Armenians from Turkey and the neighboring countries for the purpose of creating a new pan-Turanian empire. Through the spring and summer of 1915, in all areas outside the war zones, the Armenian population was ordered deported from their homes. Convoys consisting of tens of thousands, including men, women, and children, were driven hundreds of miles toward the Syrian desert. The deportations were disguised as resettlement programs. Their brutal treatment of the deportees, most of whom were made to walk to their destinations, make it apparent that the deportations were mainly intended as death marches. There is no proof of the genocidal intention of the CUP. None of those documents survived, which in my opinion was probably the smartest thing these people did. But they did march hundreds of thousands of people, almost a million, in the Syrian desert with no food, water, or shelter. If they if if they weren't trying to exterminate this people, what did they think would happen instead? That's the question I think needs to be answered by this. And this was 100 years ago, but Turkey is still really angry anytime anybody mentions it. Um, they did execute people in small batches, not as many as died on the quote unquote death march. Um, they tried to empty out their lands. Luckily for the Armenian people, the declaration of the Republic of Turkey and the end of the First World War, they drew a line in Anatolia where it didn't extend back up that far into the Caucasus, and they carved out the Armenian homeland around Lake Van, which is basically where they're from. Uh, Also, they're kind of Anatolian. And that's where they settled and made a nation. Again, it was a Soviet satellite nation, but it is a modern economic nation now. There were also a lot of people who left it in diaspora. The people were defending themselves, and the Russians did help them out towards the end of the war. But the Russians had their own problems to deal with, i.e., they had to stop fighting a war. They had a civil war. And then, like 6 months later, they had another civil war, which lasted years, and which brought about the Soviet Union. Um, And it wasn't clear that the Soviets were gonna win until they did, just like the Chinese. By setting up refugee camps, orphanages, medical clinics, and educational facilities, Near East Relief rescued the surviving Armenian populations. That was supported by the U.S. Congress authorized the formation of a relief committee, which raised funds to feed the starving Armenians. Near East Relief. As the committee was eventually known, saved tens of thousands of lives after the war. It headed a large-scale effort to rehabilitate the survivors who were mostly left to their own devices in their places of deportation. They got some of the Armenians back to Armenia. We also took a very large population of them in Los Angeles. Um, in the post-war period, nearly 400 of the key CUP officials implicated in the atrocities committed against the Armenians were arrested by the Turkish government. A number of domestic military tribunals were convened, which brought charges ranging from the unconstitutional seizure of power and subversion of the legal government, the conduct of a war, aggression, and conspiracies, the liquidation of the Armenian populations, to more explicit capital crimes, including massacres. Some of the accused were found guilty of the charges. Most significantly, the ruling triumvirate was condemned to death. They, however, eluded justice by fleeing abroad. Um, Talat, the principal architect of the Armenian Genocide, was killed in 1921 in Berlin, where he had gone into hiding. His assassin was arrested and tried at a German court, which acquitted him. Most of these implications of war crimes evaded justice, and many joined the new nationalist Turkish movement led by, I'm sorry, Mustafa Kemal, which is why he became Kemal Ataturk. In a series of military campaigns against Russian Armenia in 1920, against the refugee Armenians who had returned to Cilician in southern Turkey in 1921, and against the Greek army which had occupied Izmir or Smyrna, where the last intact Armenian community in Anatolia still existed in 1922. Turkey was then declared a republic in 1923 and received international recognition. The Armenian question and all related matters of resettlement and restitution were swept aside and soon forgotten. Because again, Turkey agreed to carve out that section that was up in the Caucasus and basically just give it to Armenia. Um, but it was in the Soviet sphere of influence, so they became a Soviet satellite. They became a Soviet Socialist Republic. It was the Soviet Socialist Republic of Armenia. That was a lot of information, and I'm sorry about that. The problem with this is it wasn't well documented at the time. It was during the First World War, which was in this area basically a cataclysm. A lot of people in Anatolia, the Caucasus, starved to death whether they were on a march or not
Right.
because there was no food getting in. Um, However, having said this, Turkey did, in its early days of its creation, execute a lot of these people for committing acts of genocide. I don't understand why today they can't say, hey, we executed these guys. We even went as far as going to get one in Berlin in 1921. And it would probably do a lot to mitigate a lot of the bad blood that's going on. So I don't know why they don't do that because they'd already admitted to it. They admitted to it 100 years ago. Um, but geopolitics being what it was, Armenia was on the side of the Soviets during the Cold War, and Turkey was on with us. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Hmm.
Is it because they might have to implicate Kemal Ataturk, who is their hero? Maybe. I don't know. We do know that there were 2 million Armenians living in Turkey, and by the end of it, there were less than a million. So, what happened to those people? Yeah, they may not have just stood them up and put them in gas chambers, but marching somebody 2 weeks in the desert with no food or water, you might as well have just shot him. It would have been nicer, you know? That's a horrible way to die.
Yeah.
Mothers and babies and little old ladies, little old men marching in the Syrian desert
Awful.
while a war was going on
Yeah.
in the area. Just horrible. I don't know. Usually I cover these genocides and stuff just because I feel like we should talk about them more. Because We don't want to repeat shit like that.
Right. No, and that's I think we've said it on the show, but I mean, we have all said this for years. I've said this for years. I was very big into history, starting late in high school, all the way into college, and to this day. Um, the reason it's so important to study history, and there's a lot of people out there that hate studying history because it's a lot of dates to remember, and there's a lot of facts to remember, and they might get bored. And I I understand where those people are at because everybody is going to have the things they like and the things they don't. But why history is so important to learn and continue to keep learning is because history repeats itself and we have to learn from our mistakes. Um, you've seen times throughout history where people did not learn from their mistakes. In World War One, the Germans found out it's a bad idea to attack Russia in the winter.
Hmm.
They did not learn that lesson in World War II, and they attacked Russia in the winter again.
Yeah, but I mean, in the First World War, they beat the Germans' ass at the Mazurkan Lakes and the other part. Once they got into the Ukraine and Archangel, that's where they ran into trouble.
No, I
But if they were
understand.
just going to go up to the Finnish border, they would have been fine. The
No,
problem is that's not what they did.
right. And that I know, and that's what I'm saying. They did not learn from that mistake. You just and it's just you've got to look at history and you've got to see what happened. And I'll bring World War II up again. We have to be very careful in today's society that we do not allow another charismatic person like Adolf Hitler was. Because if you haven't studied history very, very well, you see Hitler as this monster, and how in the world could people follow him? That's how you see it if you don't know your history.
Hmm.
If you know your history, what you'll know is the German people loved him.
Yes.
They loved him because he didn't start on the grand stage. He started in the little local pubs in little towns and told people, this is terrible, that Germany is not great. We
Hmm.
should be. We
Hmm.
should be a great and proud nation. And he pumped those people up and he filled them with this sense of national pride. And so by the time he came into power, he had this massive following of people behind him who loved him because he stood on this premise that Germany should be great.
Germany and Germans should be great. Why
Now,
aren't they?
now, Hitler was a mass murdering fuckhead.
Yes.
I'm not going to deny that. He was an
Not even
awful,
German. He was
no, he was
Austrian.
Austrian. He was Austrian. Um, not only was he not German, but he also was not blonde, tall, and blue-eyed like he wanted the Aryan race to be. But anyway,
He was also a quarter Jewish.
yes, yes, he was. So that belabors the point. But what I'm saying is, we have to be careful in today's society, especially with the mass media that we have at our fingertips today. It is very, it would be very easy for someone like that to get that kind of rally
Oh
behind them
yeah.
again. Be
It
very
would
careful.
he spoke in very simple language too,
Yeah,
which people liked
yeah,
because he wasn't educated. He
right.
spoke like an uneducated person, but he was able to charismatically speak that way.
Back up. He was educated. He
He was
failed.
not.
Yes, he was. He failed at the education he was going for because he was going
Yeah, but
for art.
I understand that. He was drummed out of most of the schools he was in because he
Yes.
refused to sit down and do what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, I would not say he was uneducated. I would say that he was just rallying against authority. He didn't want to do what he was told, and he wanted to do his own thing, which drummed him out.
Yes, but when
He was
he spoke like an uneducated person.
Yes, he absolutely
He
did
used the same words over and
because he
over
knew
again.
how to speak to people. He knew how to speak to people on their level, which is how he did what he did in the pubs, which is how he did what he did to rally the people behind him. He knew how to talk to people on their level. Now, was he a smart man? In some ways, yeah. In a lot of ways, no. Um, he followed the wrong people. He followed the wrong advice. Had he listened to some of his more educated and smarter military strategists like
Erwin
Rommel,
Rommel, Heinz Guderian.
Yes, like Rommel over Goering,
Yeah.
Germany probably would have won that war.
Yeah, Hermann Goering was a drug addict.
Yes. Had Hitler listened to the right people, Germany probably would have won that war. Thank God he didn't.
Yeah, he didn't listen to
You
Guderian or Rommel.
Right. Thank God he did not listen to those people. And that's where I say he was not smart because he just couldn't see past. And why did he listen to Goering over Rommel? Because Goering told him what he wanted to hear.
Yeah,
Rommel
Goering kissed his ass.
Rommel told him what he needed to hear. So very different viewpoints. And
Yeah,
Hitler didn't want to hear what he needed.
yeah,
He wanted to be told what he wanted to hear. And so to our benefit to this day, Germany did not win the war because he
right.
listened to the wrong people. He did not pay attention to history.
No, he did not. This is
History,
why we should.
yeah, history can save future problems if we just look and see how it may have been handled in the past. We could either A, choose to follow that because it worked, or B, go, oh, fuck no, we're not going to do that again and go away from it. That's why history is important. That's why I stand on that so much. So I'm sorry, I got on my soapbox
No,
about
no, no,
history.
no, no. I think we agree wholeheartedly. Other than I don't think Hitler was that bright. I just think he was good at manipulating people.
And that is a type bright in its own. That's kind of
Okay,
where I'm
yeah,
getting
okay.
to.
I think I see what you're saying. All right.
That's a type of smartness in its own. I'm not going to sit here to this day and tell you that all these cult leaders that amassed all these hundreds of followers and got them to all kill themselves, I'm not going to tell you they were all bright people, but I
Mm-hmm.
am going to tell you they were smart enough to know how to talk to people.
How to talk to people. Right
And
on.
that's where they have a different set of smarts. And that's why I don't say they're uneducated or they're not smart. I think they have a different set that worked for exactly what they were trying to do.
Well, that wraps it up for the Murdery this weekend. Please get out there and check out our stuff. I am
Here
terrible
we
at
go.
this.
Here we go. I'm going to let him do it. Go.
Damn it. So please, yeah, go to our website, nerdymurdery.com. It's the hub where you can get everything, including our YouTube page.
Yeah, thanks. So we've got our YouTube page, and Zig, not me, does updates pretty much every day. Puts out little videos. I recently described it to someone as a little bit of a peek inside of our mind, because you get little flashes of basically just whatever is crossing Zig's mind that day, and things that might fit to the episode or might not. But really, this is how our brains work. We do these little flashes, and these things go across our plate. And those videos are a perfect example of why we started this podcast in the first place, because we used to sit around a table and we could talk about 30 different conversations in the matter of a couple of hours, not a single one of them connected, except that you could find a bridge somewhere that connected it to the next one. Those videos are exactly like that. And Zig, I appreciate all your work on that.
Thank you, sir. Uh, and next, you should definitely check out our merchandise page, get some merchandise for yourself, or check out our Patreon page because anything you do to does go to help fund the show, which we have to pay for out of our own pocket. It's not free to do this. We don't have Lamborghinis or vast mansions.
I do.
Besides,
I
if
do.
you buy
I have a
that
Lamborghini.
shirt,
I have a
it's gonna
mansion.
look damn good on you.
You're going to look damn good. You're going to look damn good. I have a Lamborghini. I have a mansion.
You do not.
Yeah, that's very true.
And something you can do that costs nothing is anywhere you can leave us a review. Please give us a 5-star review if you liked what you saw. It helps people. Our algorithm. It helps push the algorithm out to people who want to hear our stuff, who are able to get to it a little easier.
Absolutely. The algorithms feed into this kind of stuff. When they see people who like a particular thing, a particular topic, the algorithms will feed them to other people that are looking for that. Apple does that. iTunes does that. Spotify will do that for recommendations. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff they feed. They find that audience that resonates with what you're putting out there, and it'll keep showing it to those people. So it's very, very helpful to us. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you.
And last but not least, to our good friend Chuck, you can go to sleep now, Chuck.
Go to sleep now, Chuck.
Good night, Chuck.
Good night,
So
Chuck.
with that,
I have been Jeffrey with your nerdery.
and I have been Zig with your murdery.
Cue the music.